Hello everyone, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. The gloves are finished, they are on, they are ready for their final evaluation. So this little video is going to take you through how I've kind of evaluated them and the things that I'm then going to take forward into improving my pattern and the improvements I'll take forward in the next pair. So let's get into it. Hello everyone, so we've finished our gloves, and once I have finished sewing the gloves I like to go around and just sort of have a little trim of the seams with the scissors, trimming off any bits that are sort of maybe a little bit fluffy or poking out of the seams. And then I also go around with my hammer and just check the start points where I've started my threads and where I've finished my threads to make sure that there aren't any sort of hard parts there, or there aren't any awkward knots that could rub. So I always give them a little bit of an extra tap. So I tend to just check where the threads have started and where the threads have finished. The next thing I need to do is to have a little look at how the gloves fit overall. And I think I'm really pleased with how they are looking and how they are feeling, and some of the things I'm going to pick up on are perhaps not quite what I was expecting to be talking to you about. So let's get into those things and review our pattern. So on both hands I'm very happy with the length of the thumbs, the length of the index finger and the length of the fifth finger. My third and fourth fingers, certainly on my left and then on my right, I feel could do with a little bit of extra length. I think as I was sort of putting my left hand together, I felt that perhaps I'd eased the back of the finger here down that way, and you can see a few wrinkles there that kind of give us a bit of a clue to that. So I needed to make sure that when I did my right hand that I made sure that I didn't actually push any of the excess down. So the finger itself, and when you put your leather gloves on you are going to have to ease them into position a little bit and sort of walk them down your fingers, but I do feel that this finger and this finger are where there's a little bit of pressure, so I did adapt that, and I sort of paid particular attention to how I then trimmed the underneath of the sort of palm view of the finger before I stitched the finger up, to make sure that I had eased that round. So I think I felt on this side I was cutting off a slightly longer piece, but on this side I cut off a slightly shorter piece and it made it a little better. As I look at the base of the fingers, I can feel, just by feel alone, that my finger, the base of my sort of glove, isn't quite in the webbing of my finger, so I might quite like to sort of look at that, and it feels sort of fairly similar across the hands. So what I'd like to do is just have a look at that on the pattern as well. Now the other reason why it might not sort of feel quite so right is that the finger's perhaps not quite long enough. So I'm going to go back and I will have a look at that as well. So there's potentially quite a few reasons, and it's just sort of trying to break them down and work out what's right for your gloves. As I look at my thumbs, I kind of feel I'm quite happy with the shape, but they do feel a little tight, and I think the right one does feel a little better than the left. So I want to make sure that I add a little bit more ease into this when I have another look at the pattern. So the first thing to do when making any alterations is to go back to your original pattern draft and to check your measurements. Now I've sort of made a few adjustments here that I'm just going to talk you through. On my third finger I've actually added an extra ½ centimetre, and I've done the same on my fourth finger. I've also moved the points down, so at the base of each of those fingers I've moved those 3 points down by another ½ centimetre, and on this here you can just about see where I've circled in blue. Let me zoom in to show you. So I've moved the points on the back of the finger down by just ½ centimetre, but this does have a knock-on effect to measurements elsewhere. So this was the original base of my finger, so I've moved that down a little bit, and then we've also adjusted. So when we look at the back of the hand, in effect it's come down just half a centimetre. So this point is what we look at when we look at the back of the hand, and this point here would be the front of the hand, remembering that there is a sort of almost a diagonal slope, so the back of the hand is lower than the point at the front of the hand. So I've altered all three of those, and I've added length, as I've mentioned, to the third and the fourth finger. Now, how have I worked that out? Well, I've looked at sort of really done it a little bit by feel. So I've got hold of my point and I'm just sort of having a feel at the base of my fingers. So I want to sort of use that as a bit of a guide. I'm using perhaps a little bit of the tightness and how it feels at the top of the finger. But I also know that any adjustments I do, particularly here and particularly at the top of the fingers, will then have an effect on the rest of the pattern. Something else I could do to work out how much to add at the top is to look at my finger pad. Let me just take the fourth finger because that's probably a bit easier to turn towards the camera, and I want to sort of look at the depth there. So if I wanted to sort of make sure that I'd had enough length, I could also add on half of the depth of the tip of the finger. Remember, the palm view is going to be coming up and going around, but it might just be worth having a little bit extra. So I might just add, so if that's say half a centimetre, it could be maybe 3mm or even 4mm just onto the length at this particular point up here, to make sure that I got a nice sort of comfortable fit without it feeling pressured in the top here as well. Now, it would be easy to just say, okay, I'll make the fingers longer, and yes, absolutely, you could do that as well. I've also sort of, when I put the right hand together, wanted to check how I was adding and adjusting the template under here, so I know that when I'm easing the palm view in and bringing it up to meet the top of the finger, that I actually need to sort of almost start easing from down to sort of the last sort of third of the finger up and around the pad, which can look a little bit wrinkly, but it means that when the glove is on, that you get a really good fit. Now, your eager beavers amongst you will notice that I haven't yet eased the glove down my fingers, because there was a big problem, and it's time for me to make a confession. I did have an issue with the gloves just as I was getting ready to film the last part of this tutorial. Normally, when I'm testing gloves, I would wear them, I'd drive in them, I would do all sorts in them. However, when I went to put the right hand glove on, I ended up, as you can just about see here, I ended up ripping the leather. And this is where it's just sort of worth reminding myself that the leather I'm using perhaps isn't the best quality, so there's always going to be a slight hazard because I'm not using the best bit of the leather for what I'm doing here. And if this has come from the belly and the sort of the very edge of the leather, where if you've watched all the videos you'll know where we cut that from, then the chances are that it's probably not the best quality. I thought initially I'd just pulled off a little piece, but actually that little piece turned into a slightly bigger bit, as you can see. So I won't necessarily be able to wear these to sort of practice them and to sort of wear them in, but it won't stop me sort of evaluating them and improving them. So I'm really sort of saddened for this to have happened, but it does perhaps highlight, you know, the sort of the issue when you're making a mock-up and you want to sort of have good economy with your leather, that sometimes this of course can happen. The other reason, of course, why I might have got a rip is because I didn't allow enough on the side for me to be able to get the glove on and off comfortably without it sort of catching. So another reason could well be that I just need to make this bottom part of the glove on both sides of the glove a little bit wider. So you can see here that I've drawn in my original line on my new tracing, and then I've just added a little bit more width towards the sort of the base of that curve. So this distance hasn't changed, but what I have done is brought out a line, as you can see, so that when the leather's cut now, it's going to be at a little bit more of an angle. So I've also repeated that line on the other side, so both sides are the same. So I've made the base of my pattern just that little bit wider. The thumb view on the trank, I'm not changing. I'm quite happy with that. I'm sorry, there's a bit of rubbing out marks sort of here where I've erased a few lines to keep it nice and smooth, but that part won't be changing for me. So as we now look at the changes I'd like to make to the fingers, I can see here that I've got my trank laid out flat. This is the right hand as we were looking at it, the palm view, the back of the hand view. Now what I found when I had the glove on, and you may sort of have seen in the clips at the start, was that the fingers needed a little bit more of a taper. Now particularly on the palm side, but also a little bit on the back of the hand as well. So the sort of the heavily shaded areas here are just the bits where I'm making the adjustments, and what I've done is sort of based on how the sort of the glove has looked when I've sort of extended out the fingers and I've had a look at them, and I can see that perhaps just this sort of central section of the finger looks a little bit baggy. That's something I don't necessarily want when I make my gloves properly. So I've extended the taper coming down into the fingers a little bit longer, so it's probably a little bit harder to see on camera. Let's see if we can take you a little bit closer. So if you see where the heavily shaded area is, if you imagine I'm coming on the inside of that line, so up against the finger, those are the bits that I'll be cutting, and the taper will extend quite deep into the finger this time. I've popped it onto tracing paper because it allows me to sort of fiddle with it, and I can also work out the best way of shaping those ends of the fingers so that I can keep the bits I like. So I didn't like how I'd shaped this finger, but I did like how I'd shaped the finger on the right hand. So you've kind of got sort of my first round, my second round, and again the sort of tweaks to make to the improvements. So the shaded areas on here, particularly down the sides of the fingers, are where I would be trimming and removing the excess leather when I open up the fingers. I've also taken care to make sure that the points at the base of the fingers are the ones that I've moved down, and you can see this was the new point, and that on the back of the hand is where of course it's a centimetre lower, and then of course I've got the new ones on here. And I've also remembered to extend the length of the fingers, so where I extended the length of the fingers, I've then taken that, so that's a centimetre longer on the palm view, just like we did when we were drawing up the pattern. So how did I decide how much to take off? May well be a question you're asking. Well, when I was clipping and using my clips to just check the fit of the glove initially, I was able to have a look at where the glove might have felt a bit sort of paddly, where it felt a little bit wide, and sort of start trimming accordingly. I was also looking, and this does help with the fourchette shape as well, which I'll come on to, at the bits that I was actually trimming off. So in terms of getting the fit, I was looking at the bits that were coming off each finger, and that's also then helped informed what I've added on to my drawing here. Now the thumb was a little bit tight, so what I did with the thumb was, with my card, I've folded the card in half again and used a bone folder on the crease. I've then marked 1/2 centimetre away from that because I want to add about 1 centimetre altogether, and that should give me enough ease. So what I've done is I've then marked a line 1/2 centimetre away from the fold. I'm then placing my template on, and remember we do reverse the template for the actual sort of piece itself, but for when we're drawing it out we're going to keep it left and right, and I'm just going to slide it across. I've added a couple of extra horizontal lines as well as the vertical central line to help me line everything up, and I'm starting off with drawing the right hand side of the thumb with the curved section. So I've placed that into position and I've drawn around it. I've then shifted it over, and I've also then drawn around the other side. Now I also have marked on the A, B, C, D as well before I've sort of shifted things over, and once I've taken the template off, I've then just shaped out the top of the thumb a little bit more. And on the glove itself, I felt that when I was wearing it I wanted just a little bit more of an ease here, so I've added slightly more rounding to the shape of the bottom. of the thumb piece, and that will just sort of give me just a little bit more here. So I'm not going to have a massive amount to ease in, but it will just give me a little bit more of a better fit. I also didn't want there to sort of be the effect another seam sort of almost starting to form here, so I've just shortened and tapered the sort of side in a little bit more, and that will also give me just a little bit more at the tip as well. What I didn't want was for everything to sort of be really tight at the tip, because ideally when you've got your leather gloves on, you want to be kind of easing them down the fingers and on into position so that they will sit nice and comfortably. And then when of course you take them off, you are removing them by sort of gently easing them off the fingers first before taking them off the whole hand. Now the fourchette is the last thing that I wanted to review, and I know from fitting the fingers and from the bits that I've actually cut off where I have tried to fit, and I did sort of leave it on a couple of fingers just to see how it worked, and I think the first one I left it on was the finger number 4 of the left hand, and I can sort of see that it's quite kind of baggy and not necessarily a sort of the fit that I was after. So I've looked at sort of testing the tapering, I've looked at the bits that I've cut off, so you might think that they're now off cuts, but they're actually quite important in terms of informing any pattern adaptations that you're going to make. And I always do the clipping first so I can get a sense of whether or not I'm going to need to take much off or a little bit, and how that might look. What did surprise me was just how comfortable the base of the fingers felt. I thought that when I was looking at this that I made this perhaps a little bit too wide, but actually on all 4 fingers, and that's worked really, really well. I'm happy with the length, so the only thing I really want to change on the fourchette is this particular section where we are going to just cut off that sort of shaded section. So in effect the new shape is what's on the table, just that sort of outline. So you can see here this shaded section will be going, and this will then become the new template. So the next step now is to get the tracing with the new trank shape stuck onto card and then cut out, and likewise these are already on the card, just get these cut out, make sure that they are marked up and labelled appropriately, and then we move on to creating our new gloves using our adapted pattern pieces. Now as I sew up the new gloves, I would still be checking the fit and clipping them, tacking them in the same way, and just taking time to make sure that I'm getting the best fit possible. Normally when you are making your gloves, you don't necessarily want to be cutting off the length that is on the fingers here, so I don't necessarily want to be cutting off what's the back of the hand and sort of adapting the length. But if once I've sort of done my clipping with the new pattern piece, I think, well actually I could just shave a little bit off there, then I could do that. The important thing is that your fingers have got room to maneuver. I'm not in this with this particular pattern making a skin tight pair of gloves, but we do want to have a little bit of sort of flexibility in the top of the fingers there. So when you are putting your gloves on, you want to just take time and care, just very delicately, to make sure that they are going to be eased onto your fingers. So easing them on, which is why I sort of tend to prefer a slightly baggier glove, is just making sure that everything is on properly and that your hands are nice and comfortable. You should be able to move them quite freely. If they are busting out of the seams or they're ripping, then you may know that there's a problem with the pattern somewhere, and it's just worth having a look at whether or not you've allowed enough room to get into the glove. If you are using perhaps the wrong bit of leather, which doesn't lend itself to making the gloves. So on the one that I've ripped, and I can only apologise, but sometimes when you're doing a tutorial these things do happen, so I'm hoping that by seeing what's happened to me, you will be able to go, okay, I might avoid that when I'm doing my my mock-up pair. Now we use the sort of the piece of the leather that I perhaps wouldn't use for my actual gloves, and normally when I'm this sort of part of the leather, I don't know if you can see too well, but it's quite fluffy. That's part of the belly, which is going to be very sort of stretchy and perhaps not quite as strong as perhaps leather from elsewhere on the body. So I might sort of say for my actual gloves, I'm quite glad that these aren't my actual gloves, because I'd probably be in tears right now. But I know for a mock-up pair that it's fine. I've tested the pattern, I know where I've gone wrong, I can see that I need to make sure that my hand can actually get into the glove. For this particular style, I didn't necessarily want to have a sort of a large opening, but that could be something I put in into future styles. I quite like sort of being able to pull my glove on and sort of tuck them under my jumper or my jacket. So I hope that looking at what I've done, and you've actually enjoyed this series of tutorials that we've put together here on glove making. We do have some more glove making coming up, and I'm going to talk to you a little about that in just a moment. If you are measuring somebody that might have, say, arthritic fingers, or if they've had an injury and the finger is sort of kept in a permanently bent position, then you may have to adapt your measuring technique to make sure that you can cover the length of the finger. So if you're measuring the length of the finger, it might be better to use a soft tape measure and then follow however their finger is sort of fixed to the tip to get the measurement of the finger. You're going to have to factor in some ease so that they can get the glove on and off, because you don't want to be trying to put on a tight glove to a finger that you can't move. So factor in that curve and work with a soft tape measure, because it allows you to then get perhaps the truer length of the curve. And you may also need to add in a little bit of the depth of the finger onto the length, so that you're sort of able to pick up the depth that you've got there. Once you've got your basic pattern and your basic template, you can make gloves to your heart's content. It's the method I've used in these videos is the method that I have used when making gloves for other people. It's also the sort of same method I've used when I've been breaking up the pattern piece to create different styles of gloves, as you can see in this particular glove here. Now I have just sort of checked this glove against the pattern piece I used for the black gloves, and it is a little bit wider across the hand so I can get the glove on, because this is quite a long style that just sort of comes down, and there isn't a particular sort of flare at the bottom here. So in our next sort of set of videos that we've got coming up, we'll be having a look at how we create a pattern like this, and what you need to do in order to sort of get your pieces to work together. We'll also be looking at a slightly different style of a fourchette, and this is a style that has what we call a quirk in it. Now this is the quirk is it's got a diamond shaped piece of leather there, and I think on this hand, yep, we've got a sort of a fourchette, and we've got a red quirk at the bottom there, which is that red diamond shape. This is a slightly different style of fourchette, which before you cut it, it looks like sort of quite a long oval with sort of two fingertips at the end, and then when it's opened out, it has the quirk at the base. I find this quite useful if somebody has sort of quite a deep hand, because it enables you to add a little bit more depth to the glove, and that can help the glove sort of sit nicer as well. So we'll be taking you through how to create the design, and we'll be working from our original paper template, which you might remember from the earlier series. So we've got our original template. I'll be taking a tracing from that because that's got all my adaptations on. You could of course draw it out again, and with the adaptations we've just done, rather than cut them off, you could of course draw this out brand new, and then you've got your tapers that you could already draw in and just adapt the measurements. I quite like working from a sort of a working drawing and adapting as I go along, but you know, there are always options with these things. So until we meet again, Happy sewing and happy glove making, and thank you for watching this series of videos. I do apologise for my hands sometimes getting in the way of the camera, but I'm hopefully getting a little better at that, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.